Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the data streaming across her monitor in the Mars Analysis Center, her hands trembling slightly as she double-checked the readings for the fourth time. The anomalous signal patterns couldn't be dismissed as background radiation or equipment malfunction anymore. After 15 years of analyzing Mars data at NASA's Advanced Research Division, she had never seen anything like this. "Dr. Roberts, could you take a look at this?" she called out to her colleague, trying to keep her voice steady. The patterns were too regular, too structured to be natural phenomena. They were emanating from the Valles Marineris region, Earth's longest-known canyon system's Martian cousin. Marcus Roberts, the team's senior data analyst, leaned over her shoulder, his expression shifting from mild interest to intense focus as he processed what he was seeing. "How long has this been active?" "That's the thing," Sarah replied, pulling up a timeline of readings. "These patterns were always present in our historical data, but our new quantum-based analysis algorithms just revealed them. We've been looking right at them for decades without realizing it." The discovery had started routinely enough. NASA's latest Mars orbital satellite, equipped with quantum sensors designed to detect subatomic variations in the Martian crust, had been collecting data for 6 months. Sarah's team was tasked with analyzing the information for signs of ancient subsurface water systems or mineral deposits that could support future colonization efforts. Instead, they found something that defied explanation: complex repeating energy signatures that seemed to pulse in synchronized patterns deep beneath the Martian surface. The signals appeared to be organized in a way that suggested intelligent design, but that wasn't even the most disturbing part. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling up a comparative analysis. "The patterns aren't static. They're evolving, changing, adapting. Whatever's generating them isn't just active, it's responding to its environment." Marcus pulled up a chair, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. "We need to classify this immediately. Level 1 priority." He reached for his secure phone to contact the department head, but Sarah grabbed his wrist. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more." She typed a series of commands, bringing up a new dataset. "I've been tracking the signal's response patterns. They intensified significantly when our new satellite entered orbit. Almost as if..." "As if what?" Marcus prompted, though his expression suggested he already knew what she was going to say. "As if it noticed us watching." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If these signals represented what they appeared to be, evidence of current active intelligence on Mars, it would rewrite human history. But something about the patterns made Sarah's skin crawl. The way they pulsed and shifted reminded her of something predatory, like a spider feeling vibrations in its web. The next few days passed in a blur of classified briefings and endless data analysis. NASA's top administrators were brought in, along with experts from various space agencies worldwide. Everyone agreed on 2 things. The signals were definitely artificial, and they needed to be investigated immediately. Sarah found herself appointed as the lead scientific advisor for what would become Operation Crosslight, humanity's first manned mission to investigate potential active alien intelligence. The project had been fast-tracked with unprecedented speed and secrecy, utilizing prototype technologies that had been in development for years. As she sat in her office late one night, reviewing crew selections and mission parameters, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The signal patterns had changed again, but this time they seemed to be organizing themselves into distinct clusters. When she ran them through a 3-dimensional visualization program, they formed structures that looked disturbingly like human neural patterns. She was about to contact Marcus when her computer screen flickered. For a split second, she could have sworn she saw something in the visualization, a pattern that looked like an eye staring right at her. When she blinked, it was gone, replaced by the normal signal readings. Sarah sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. She told herself it was just fatigue, the result of too many long nights poring over data. But as she gathered her things to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed her noticing it. And whatever it was, it had been waiting a very long time to be discovered. As she drove home that night, the stars seemed different somehow, colder, more distant, and Mars, visible as a bright red dot in the sky, appeared to pulse ever so slightly, like a beacon calling out across the void. Or perhaps, she thought with a shiver, like an eye slowly opening after a long sleep. The gleaming white corridors of NASA's Advanced Space Training Facility felt different at night. Dr. Sarah Chen walked past the rows of simulator pods, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. After 3 months of intensive preparation, Operation Crosslight was ready to launch, but something about the mission parameters kept nagging at her. The crew had been selected with remarkable speed. Commander James Morrison, a veteran of multiple space missions, Dr. Elena Torres, the xenobiologist, Dr. Michael Chang, the quantum physicist, and Lieutenant Laura Walker, their systems specialist. Sarah herself would be joining as the mission's chief science officer, something she hadn't initially planned for. The signals specifically intensified when you were analyzing them, Director Harrison had told her during the final briefing. We need you on this mission. What he hadn't said, but Sarah had noticed in his classified reports, was that the signals showed unusual patterns whenever she was in direct contact with the data. Tonight, she was running one final simulation when she noticed something odd about the training pod's display. The diagnostic readings showed brief moments of interference, something that hadn't happened in any previous sessions. She made a note to have the technical team check it in the morning. Working late again? Sarah jumped at the voice. Elena Torres stood in the doorway, her dark eyes reflecting the pod's blue emergency lights. Just double-checking some calibrations, Sarah replied, trying to steady her nerves. What brings you here at this hour? Elena walked over to the adjacent pod, running her hand along its smooth surface. Couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about those signal patterns you found. The way they organize themselves, it's almost like they're trying to mimic something familiar. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't shared her observations about the neural-like patterns with anyone except Marcus. What do you mean? Look at this. Elena pulled up a holographic display showing the latest signal data. See how they cluster and branch? It reminds me of something I studied in my postdoc work on evolutionary biology, the way certain organisms adapt to mimic their prey's neural pathways. Before Sarah could respond, the lights in the facility flickered. The holographic display distorted for a moment, and Sarah could have sworn she saw the patterns arrange themselves into a familiar shape, the same eye-like formation she'd seen months ago. The next few weeks passed in a blur of final preparations. The Odyssey, their state-of-the-art spacecraft, was ready for launch at NASA's new vertical assembly building. Built using experimental quantum drive technology, it would make the journey to Mars in just 30 days, instead of the usual 6 to 8 months. During the final equipment check, Sarah noticed something unusual about their quantum communications array. The diagnostic tests showed perfectly normal results, but when she ran her own specialized analysis, she detected subtle anomalies in the system's baseline readings. They were similar to the patterns they'd detected from Mars, but much fainter, as if they were echoes. Commander Morrison found her in the ship's lab the night before launch, surrounded by holographic displays of data. Everything all right, Dr. Chen? Sarah quickly closed the displays. Yes, just some last-minute checks. She hesitated, then added, Commander, have you noticed anything unusual during the simulations? Any unexpected readings or system behaviors? Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed a slight tension in his jaw, like the interference in Pod 3, or the communication glitches in the quantum array. You've seen them too, Sarah said, relief mixing with apprehension in her voice. I have, he confirmed, lowering his voice. And I've noticed something else. The closer we get to launch, the more frequent these anomalies become. It's as if something's anticipating our arrival, Sarah finished. They shared a long look, both understanding the implications but neither willing to voice them. The mission would proceed as planned. Too much had been invested, too many resources committed. But as Sarah lay in her quarters that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just embarking on a mission of discovery. The patterns she'd been studying for months had changed again. They were no longer just responding to observation. They were reaching out, probing, testing. And somehow, deep in her bones, Sarah knew that whatever waited for them on Mars had been orchestrating this moment for far longer than humanity had been watching the red planet. As she drifted off to sleep, her tablet quietly displayed the latest signal analysis from Mars. In the darkness of her room, the patterns pulsed softly, arranging themselves into complex structures that looked remarkably like the neural pathways of a human brain in REM sleep. And somewhere, millions of miles away, something ancient and patient continued its careful observation of the approaching humans, adjusting its plans with mathematical precision. 2 weeks into their journey to Mars, the Odyssey cruised silently through the void of deep space. Sarah sat in the observation deck, watching the stars streak by through the reinforced viewport. The quantum drive hummed quietly, pushing them through space at unprecedented speeds, but something about its pitch seemed slightly off today. "Dr. Chen, you might want to see this." Michael Chang's voice crackled through the intercom. Sarah found him in the physics lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing quantum field measurements. The drive's creating some unusual field patterns. Sarah studied the readings, her concern growing. The quantum fluctuations surrounding the ship resembled the signal patterns they'd detected on Mars, but that should have been impossible. They were still millions of miles from the red planet. "Have you shown these to Commander Morrison?" she asked. "Not yet. I wanted to verify the data first." Michael manipulated the displays, highlighting specific patterns. "But there's something else. These fluctuations, they're affecting our crew's brainwave monitors." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Show me." The neural tracking data revealed subtle but distinct changes in their sleep patterns. Every crew member had experienced increased REM activity, their brainwaves synchronizing in patterns that matched the quantum fluctuations around the ship. Elena Torres joined them, her usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "I need to report something," she said, her voice tight. "The biological samples in my lab, they're exhibiting unusual growth patterns." In the biolab, Sarah and Michael watched as Elena pulled up microscope feeds of their test cultures. The cellular structures had reorganized themselves into configurations that seemed to defy natural laws, forming complex geometric patterns that pulsed with an inner rhythm. "It started 3 days ago," Elena explained. "At first I thought it was equipment malfunction, but..." She played a time-lapse recording. The cells moved with purpose, arranging and rearranging themselves like pieces of a living puzzle. Lieutenant Walker's voice came over the intercom, interrupting their discussion. "Bridge to Dr. Chen. We're picking up something unusual on our long-range sensors." On the bridge, Laura showed them the sensor readings. A wave of quantum distortions was spreading out from Mars, rippling through space like concentric rings in a pond. As they watched, the waves seemed to adjust their frequency, synchronizing with the Odyssey's engine output. "That's not the strangest part," Laura said, pulling up another display. "Look at these transmissions." The ship's communication array had been picking up bursts of data. At first glance, they appeared to be random noise, but when processed through their analysis systems, they resolved into patterns identical to human brain activity during problem-solving tasks. Commander Morrison called an emergency crew meeting. As they gathered in the conference room, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her colleagues' behavior. Michael kept rubbing his temples as if fighting a headache. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her data tablets. Laura's usual sharp focus seemed somehow dulled. "We need to discuss the possibility of turning back," Morrison said, his voice grave. "These anomalies..." The ship's lights flickered, and every screen in the conference room activated simultaneously. Complex patterns flowed across them, too fast to follow. Sarah felt a strange pressure in her head, like something trying to push its way in. "It's in the ship's systems," Laura announced, her fingers flying over her tablet. "The patterns, they're rewriting our code, but that's not possible. The quantum encryption..." The pressure in Sarah's head intensified. Through the conference room's viewport, she watched as the starfield seemed to twist, the lights taking on a reddish tinge. For a moment, she thought she saw something vast moving in the darkness between the stars. "We need to shut down all non-essential systems," Morrison ordered. "Full diagnostic..." The ship shuddered. In the sudden silence that followed, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. A sound like whispers, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, speaking in a language that seemed to bypass her ears and echo directly in her mind. Eleanor gasped, pointing at her tablet. The biological samples in her lab had changed again. The cellular patterns now perfectly matched the quantum fluctuations surrounding the ship. pulsing in sync with the distant signals from Mars. It's not just observing us, Sarah realized, her voice barely a whisper. It's learning, adapting, using our own technology, our own biology to understand us. Through the viewport, Mars gleamed like a red eye in the distance, growing larger with each passing moment. And in the quantum field surrounding their ship, patterns continued to shift and evolve, becoming more complex, more ordered, more conscious. As the crew scrambled to understand what was happening to their ship, their equipment, and possibly to themselves, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't really on a mission to investigate something on Mars. Instead, something on Mars had orchestrated their entire journey, patiently manipulating events until humanity sent exactly the right people, with exactly the right equipment, directly into its reach. The Odyssey's corridors felt different now. Sarah couldn't explain exactly how, but the angles seemed wrong somehow, as if the straight lines of the walls and floor were subtly curved when viewed from the corner of her eye. The ship's constant hum had taken on an almost musical quality, a melody that lingered just beyond recognition. "The quantum field distortions are getting stronger," Michael reported during their morning briefing. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. None of them had been sleeping well. "They're affecting our instruments in ways I can't explain. Time measurements between decks are showing inconsistencies." "Define inconsistencies," Commander Morrison demanded. "According to our sensors, time is moving slightly faster in the lower decks than the upper ones. We're talking microseconds, but the difference is growing." Sarah noticed Elena looking distracted, her gaze fixed on something beyond the conference room walls. "Dr. Torres? Something to add?" Elena blinked, focusing on the group. "The biological samples, they're evolving. Not just changing, but actually evolving. Days' worth of mutations happening in hours. And the new forms they're taking," she shuddered. "They're developing structures that shouldn't be possible, geometric patterns that repeat on both macro and molecular levels." Lieutenant Walker entered the conference room, her usual confident stride now hesitant. "The navigation system is acting strange. The distance to Mars keeps fluctuating. Sometimes it reads we're 3 days away, sometimes 7, sometimes—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Sometimes it shows we're already there." Sarah pulled up the latest signal analysis on her tablet, then froze. The patterns had changed again, but this time they weren't just mimicking neural activity. They were mimicking specific neural patterns. Her patterns. The ones recorded from her brain during the initial signal discovery months ago. A soft chime echoed through the ship, the environmental systems running their automatic diagnostic, but the sound seemed to hang in the air too long, transforming into something else, something almost like words. "Did anyone else hear that?" Sarah asked. The others nodded slowly. Commander Morrison reached for the intercom to contact engineering, but before he could touch it, every screen in the room activated simultaneously. The displays showed the ship's external cameras, but the images were impossible. Each screen showed the Odyssey from a different angle, as if dozens of cameras were floating in space around them. "Those aren't our camera feeds," Laura whispered. "We don't have external cameras in those positions." The images began to shift, showing the ship from angles that seemed to bend space itself. In some views, the Odyssey appeared to be stretching, its hull elongating like reflected light in a curved mirror. In others, it seemed to fold in on itself in ways that hurt to look at. Sarah felt a familiar pressure building in her head, but this time it came with images, flashes of memories that weren't her own. She saw Mars through alien eyes, watched eons pass like moments, felt the patient hunger of something vast and ancient that had slept in the red sands, waiting for beings capable of bridging the gap between ordinary space and whatever realm it inhabited. "We need to power down the quantum drive," she said suddenly, understanding clicking into place. "It's not just propelling us through space, it's thinning the boundaries between dimensions. The signals we detected, they weren't coming from Mars itself. They were coming from something using Mars as a what?" Morrison prompted. "As a door," Michael finished, his face pale. "The quantum field signatures, they're not just similar to the Mars signals, they're creating a resonance pattern. We're not just flying to Mars, we're being pulled there." The ship shuddered, and for a moment the walls seemed to become transparent. Sarah caught a glimpse of something beyond them, a space that wasn't space, filled with geometric shapes that folded through impossible dimensions. She saw vast structures that seemed to be made of frozen thought, and among them, something moved with deliberate purpose. When reality snapped back, Elena was crouched in a corner, mumbling equations to herself. Michael stood rigid, staring at his hands as if unsure they were really his. Laura sat at her station, mechanically typing commands into a console that displayed impossible readings. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the haze. "Lieutenant Walker, shut down the quantum drive. We'll continue on conventional engines." I can't," Laura responded, her voice shaking. "The commands aren't working. The system says—" She looked up, terror in her eyes. "It says the drive was never installed, that it doesn't exist, but we've been using it for weeks." Sarah's tablet chimed with an incoming signal analysis. The patterns now formed a clear message, written in English but somehow wrong, as if the letters were assembled by something that understood the shapes but not the meaning. Adjustment nearly complete, preparing for integration. Through the viewport, Mars hung in space, larger than it should have been given their supposed distance. Its surface seemed to ripple like water, and in the deeper shadows of Valles Marineris, something pulsed with a patient, ancient rhythm, calling them home. The Odyssey entered Mars orbit in impossible silence. All ship systems had gone quiet hours ago, yet they continued to move, pulled by forces that defied conventional physics. The red planet filled their viewports, its surface churning with patterns that shouldn't have been visible from orbit. "External sensors are picking up. Everything and nothing," Laura reported, her voice cracking. The display in front of her showed readings that kept shifting between different measurement systems, some of which hadn't existed minutes ago. "It's like reality itself is being rewritten around us." The Valles Marineris stretched below them like a vast wound in the planet's surface, but its dimensions seemed wrong. Sarah watched as the canyon appeared to pulse with bioluminescent patterns that spelled out complex mathematical equations, the same equations they'd been using to study the quantum signals. "The landing protocols are initiating themselves," Commander Morrison announced, his hands hovering uselessly over controls that no longer responded to human input. "Something is bringing us down." As they began their descent, Sarah noticed that Elena had been unusually quiet. The xenobiologist sat in her chair, sketching rapidly on her tablet. When Sarah glanced at the screen, her blood ran cold. Elena was drawing intricate diagrams of higher dimensional geometric structures, her eyes unfocused, hand moving with mechanical precision. "Elena?" Sarah touched her shoulder gently. Elena looked up, but her eyes seemed to be focusing on something far beyond the ship's walls. "They're beautiful, aren't they? The structures, the patterns, everything makes sense now. They've been trying to help us understand." "Who has?" Michael asked, but his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "The architects," Elena whispered, still sketching. "They've been here so long, waiting for beings who could comprehend their existence. Our quantum technology finally let them reach across. They're not hostile, they're just curious. They want to understand us, to help us evolve." The ship shuddered as it entered the Martian atmosphere, but the usual red glow of re-entry was replaced by shifting patterns of light that seemed to bend around them. Through the viewports, Sarah watched as the Martian landscape transformed. The surface below was still red, still covered in sand and rock, but now it moved like liquid, forming and reforming into complex structures that echoed the patterns they'd first detected months ago. "Look at the ground readings," Michael called out, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his fear. "The molecular structure of Mars itself is being altered, reorganized into some kind of living computational matrix." Commander Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Dr. Chen, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Sarah's mind raced, connecting patterns she'd been seeing for months. I think we found something that exists in dimensions beyond our comprehension. The signals weren't communication attempts. They were tools, reshaping our technology, our minds, even our basic understanding of reality to help us perceive them." The ship's descent continued, guided by unseen forces toward a specific point in the Valles Marineris. As they approached, Sarah saw that the canyon walls had transformed into something that resembled a vast geometric structure, its surfaces covered in shifting symbols that seemed to respond to her thoughts. Laura's console suddenly lit up with new data. "I'm picking up energy readings that shouldn't be possible. It's like the entire canyon is a single massive quantum computer, but it's operating on principles that make our technology look like stone tools." Through the viewports, they watched as the Martian surface parted like water, revealing structures beneath that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Looking at them was like trying to understand a fourth-dimensional object through its three-dimensional shadow. The mind could grasp pieces, but the whole remained tantalizingly beyond comprehension. Elena had stopped sketching and was now speaking in a language none of them recognized, her words somehow harmonizing with the ship's remaining active systems. The patterns on her tablet had begun to move, forming three-dimensional projections that hung in the air. "They're not just reaching out to us," Sarah realized, watching as the projections aligned with the structures below. "They're teaching us how to reach back. Everything, the signals, the quantum drive irregularities, the biological changes, it was all preparation." The Odyssey's landing gear deployed automatically as they approached what appeared to be a platform made of crystalline structures that shifted and flowed like living mathematics. As they touched down, Sarah felt something vast and ancient touch her mind, and suddenly she understood. They hadn't discovered evidence of a civilization on Mars. They had encountered something that used civilization itself as a tool, an intelligence so profound that it existed in the quantum fabric of space-time itself. And now, after eons of waiting, it had found beings capable of evolving to understand it. Through the viewport, the Martian landscape continued its impossible transformation, and in the shadows between dimensions, something ancient and patient prepared to welcome its long-awaited guests. The air inside the Odyssey had become thick with possibility, reality itself seeming to bend and flex around them like a living thing. As the crew prepared for their first step onto the Martian surface, Sarah noticed that the boundaries between the ship's interior and exterior had begun to blur, as if the material structure of their vessel was becoming conceptual rather than physical. "Environmental suits won't be necessary," Elena announced, her voice carrying strange harmonics that seemed to echo from multiple points in space simultaneously. "They've adjusted the local physics to accommodate us." Commander Morrison studied his science officer with concern. Elena's eyes now held geometric patterns that shifted and changed as she spoke, her very biology seeming to adapt to some new understanding of existence. "Dr. Torres, are you still you?" "I'm more me than I've ever been," Elena replied, smiling in a way that somehow occupied multiple expressions at once. "They're not changing us, Commander. They're helping us see what we already are." The landing ramp lowered itself, revealing the transformed Martian landscape. The crystalline structures they'd observed from above had evolved further, forming what appeared to be a vast geometric garden of impossible shapes that grew and flowed like living mathematics. Each formation seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, their true forms visible only when viewed through the corner of one's eye. Laura stepped forward, her hand passing through what appeared to be a solid barrier, as if it were merely a thought. The quantum field readings, they're not just off the charts, they're redefining what charts can measure. It's like reality itself is learning how to think. Michael stood at his console, tears streaming down his face as he watched equations write themselves across his screens. Solutions to physics problems humanity had struggled with for centuries, explained in a language that spoke directly to the mathematical structure of the universe. They're not just an advanced civilization, Sarah realized, watching as the patterns she'd studied for months began to take on new meaning. They're what civilization evolves into when it transcends the boundaries of space, time, and consciousness itself. The crew made their way down the ramp, each step bringing new revelations. The ground beneath their feet felt solid, yet somehow responsive, as if the entire planet was aware of their presence. In the distance, the structures that had once been the Valles Marineris rose like the architecture of thought itself, each impossible angle containing libraries of knowledge encoded in the very fabric of reality. Commander Morrison activated his communication link to Earth, But the signal that returned was unlike anything they'd expected. Instead of voices, they received pure understanding. Earth's quantum research teams had begun experiencing similar phenomena. The transformation wasn't limited to Mars. It was spreading, rippling through space like waves of enlightenment. They weren't hiding, Sarah whispered, finally understanding. They were waiting for us to develop the ability to perceive even the smallest fraction of what they are. The signals, the changes to our ship, to us. It was all preparation for this moment. As if in response to her understanding, the landscape around them shifted, revealing structures that seemed to be made of pure information. Within them, Sarah glimpsed entities that existed as patterns of thought, ancient intelligences that had evolved beyond the need for physical form. Eleanor stepped forward, her movements now carrying the fluid grace of someone experiencing reality in more dimensions than should be possible. They want to show us something they've been preparing for since before Earth existed. The Martian sky above them transformed, becoming a window into other layers of reality. Sarah watched as the stars rearranged themselves into living constellations, telling the story of a universe far more vast and conscious than humanity had ever imagined. In every direction, space itself seemed to unfold like the pages of an infinite book, each layer revealing new truths about the nature of existence. Laura's voice shook as she spoke. The quantum readings. They're showing that this is happening everywhere. Every planet, every star system. Reality itself is waking up. Commander Morrison stood at the edge of what had once been a simple landing platform, now transformed into a nexus point of intersecting dimensions. Dr. Chen, what happens now? Sarah watched as patterns of light danced between dimensions, carrying messages encoded in the structure of reality itself. We become part of the story, she replied, understanding flowing through her like a river of pure knowledge. Not the end of humanity, but its evolution into something that can finally see the universe for what it truly is, alive, aware, and waiting for us to join the conversation. The Martian sunset painted the crystalline landscape in shades of red and gold, but now each color carried meanings that extended beyond the visible spectrum into realms of pure thought. As darkness fell, the stars above burned with new significance, their light carrying messages from other transformed worlds, other evolved civilizations reaching out across the cosmos. In the distance, the geometric gardens continued to grow, each new formation a testament to the marriage of physics and consciousness. And in the spaces between moments, in the quantum foam of reality itself, ancient intelligences watched with satisfaction as humanity took its first steps into a universe far stranger and more beautiful than they had ever imagined. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, touching minds and realities that existed beyond traditional space-time. The horror she had initially felt at the transformation faded, replaced by a profound understanding that this had always been humanity's destiny, not to conquer the stars, but to become one with the living universe itself. As the last light of day faded from the Martian sky, the crew of the Odyssey stood at the threshold of a new chapter in cosmic history. Above them, Earth glowed like a blue jewel, its quantum research facilities already beginning to pulse with new understanding. The transformation that had begun on Mars was spreading, carrying with it the promise of evolution beyond anything humanity had dreamed possible. In the vast geometric gardens of what had once been Valles Marineris, reality continued to reshape itself, preparing for the next phase of cosmic evolution. And somewhere in the quantum fabric of space-time, ancient intelligences watched with satisfaction as their longest experiment finally bore fruit.